The arrival. The first thing you lose in America's toughest prisons isn't your freedom. It's your identity. On August 14, 2017, a transport bus rolled through the gates of one of the most feared correctional facilities in the United States. Inside were 38 inmates in waist chains, black box restraints, and leg irons so tight some prisoners could barely walk. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked up. Because every man on that bus already understood one thing. People entered this prison one way, and left completely different. Some never left at all. Former inmates have described the place as a city built on fear. Correctional officers called it controlled chaos. Investigative reports over the years documented violent assaults, lockdowns, gang dominance, psychological breakdowns, and a survival code outsiders could never fully understand. But what was life actually like inside? What really happens after the cell doors close? And how does an ordinary person survive in an environment where weakness becomes a target almost instantly? This is the first-hand story of a man who spent 4 years inside one of America's toughest prisons, and lived to talk about it. The inmate at the center of this story agreed to speak under one condition. His real name would never be used. So in this documentary we'll call him Marcus. Before prison, Marcus looked like someone you'd never notice twice. 26 years old. Quiet personality. Worked construction jobs around southern Texas. No gang affiliation. No violent history growing up. According to court records, his sentence began after an armed robbery connected to a drug debt spiraled out of control. Marcus expected prison to be hard. What he didn't expect was the system inside the system. Because prison isn't just walls and bars. It's politics, territory, hierarchy, and survival. The transport bus arrived just after midnight. Marcus remembers the sound first. Steel gates slamming behind the vehicle one after another. Each gate closing louder than the last. Every sound meant there was no turning back. Then came processing. Officers shouted instructions while inmates stood against concrete walls under fluorescent lights that never seemed to blink. Every personal item disappeared into storage bins. Shoes replaced. Clothing exchanged. Identity reduced to a prison number stitched onto fabric. Marcus said the atmosphere changed the moment they entered intake. Nobody moved casually anymore. Even experienced inmates became careful. Because intake was where people learned the rules without anyone explaining them. Keep your eyes forward. Don't ask questions. Don't stare. Don't act scared. One inmate violated that last rule almost immediately. A younger prisoner, barely 20, started panicking during the strip search procedure. His breathing accelerated. His hands shook. He kept asking officers how long he'd be there. The room became silent. Not because anyone cared. Because fear inside prison spreads fast. Marcus watched another inmate lean toward the younger prisoner and quietly say something that stayed with him for years. Calm down now, or they'll smell it on you forever. That was the first lesson. In prison, emotions become vulnerabilities. 3 hours later, Marcus entered general population. And that's when the real shock hit him. Most people imagine prison as endless violence. Constant fights. Screaming inmates. Total disorder. But Marcus says the most dangerous thing about prison was actually how organized it felt. Every race had sections. Every gang had influence. Every table in the Chow hall belonged to somebody. Even the televisions in the common areas operated under invisible rules nobody explained out loud. The prison itself functioned almost like a parallel society. Older inmates enforced discipline faster than guards did. Debts were tracked. Conflicts were negotiated. Punishments were coordinated. And newcomers were watched constantly. Especially during the first week. Marcus was assigned to a 2-man cell in C Block, one of the oldest sections of the facility. The walls were covered with scratches, coded markings, faded names, and years of damage layered into the concrete like scars. His cellmate was a heavily tattooed inmate named Rivera who had already served 11 years. The first conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Rivera looked at Marcus and asked one question. "You got people?" Marcus didn't understand. Rivera clarified immediately. "Gang. Crew. Car. Anybody backing you?" Marcus shook his head. That answer changed everything. Because unaffiliated inmates occupied the lowest level of protection inside the prison hierarchy. No alliances meant no backup during fights, thefts, extortion, or conflicts. Rivera stared at him for several seconds before finally speaking again. "Then you better learn fast." Over the next few days, Marcus began noticing patterns outsiders would never see. The morning counts. The coded hand signals. The way inmates tested each other through tiny interactions. Even something as simple as accidentally sitting in the wrong seat during chow could trigger violence. One afternoon, Marcus witnessed his first prison assault. It happened in less than 9 seconds. An inmate reached across a table and took food from another prisoner's tray without permission. Nobody yelled. Nobody argued. The entire room just froze. Then the victim stood up calmly, pulled a sharpened piece of metal from his waistband, and attacked. Guards stormed the chow hall seconds later, but by then blood had already spread across the floor. Marcus says what disturbed him most wasn't the violence itself. It was the reaction afterward. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody panicked. Everyone simply continued eating. That moment changed Marcus psychologically, because he realized prison violence wasn't random. It was normalized, expected, part of the environment itself. And the deeper he went into prison life, the more he understood that survival depended less on physical strength, and more on understanding invisible rules. Rule 1, respect mattered more than fear. Rule 2, debt could get you killed. Rule 3, never let another inmate solve your problems for free. But there was another rule nobody told him until later. The officers weren't always in control. According to multiple former inmates interviewed in public investigations over the years, some housing units operated almost entirely under inmate influence after lockdown hours. Contraband moved through hidden systems. Gambling networks operated daily. Favors became currency. And somewhere inside that structure, Marcus slowly realized something terrifying. There were inmates who had become more powerful inside prison than they had ever been outside. One name kept surfacing repeatedly in whispers across C Block. Dre. Marcus heard the name during meals, during recreation, during late-night conversations between inmates who thought nobody was listening. Nobody described Dre the same way. Some called him a peacemaker. Others called him a predator. But every version of the story ended the same way. If Dre noticed you, your prison sentence changed forever. Marcus didn't meet him immediately. But on the 10th night inside the prison that changed. The lights had just dimmed for evening lockdown when footsteps stopped outside Marcus's cell. Rivera looked toward the bars instantly. Then he muttered something under his breath Marcus would never forget. That's not good. A tall figure appeared outside the cell door. Tattoos across both arms. Calm expression. No emotion whatsoever. And behind him stood 3 other inmates watching silently. The man looked directly at Marcus for several seconds before speaking. You're the new one with no people, right? Marcus later said that question felt more dangerous than any threat he heard during his entire sentence. Because in that moment, he realized he had just been noticed. And inside America's toughest prisons, being noticed can be the beginning of the end. The system inside the walls. Marcus thought surviving prison meant avoiding violence. He was wrong. Surviving prison meant understanding power. And inside America's toughest correctional facilities, power rarely belongs to the people outsiders expect. At 9:43 p.m., standing behind the bars of cell C214, Marcus came face to face with the man inmates whispered about like a ghost story. Dre. No yelling. No threats. No dramatic entrance. That's what made him dangerous. Marcus said Dre spoke with the calmness of someone who never needed to prove anything. Around him, even hardened inmates lowered their voices automatically. Prison guards monitored entire housing units. But according to multiple former inmates and investigative reports from maximum security facilities across the United States, there were often individuals inside who controlled influence far beyond their prison sentences. Dre appeared to be one of them. He looked at Marcus for a long moment before finally speaking. You're floating. Marcus didn't understand the phrase. Rivera did. In prison slang, a floater was an inmate with no protection, no alliances, and no structure behind him. The kind of inmate gangs targeted for manipulation, extortion, or recruitment. Dre leaned against the bars casually. That's dangerous in here. Then he walked away. No explanation. No demands. Just a warning. Marcus expected relief after the encounter ended. Instead, the anxiety became worse. Because now people were paying attention to him. In prison, visibility creates risk. The more people know your situation, the more leverage they have over you. And over the next few weeks, Marcus began seeing how the real prison economy operated beneath the surface. Most outsiders imagine prison as controlled entirely by guards and administration. But former inmates consistently describe another reality, an underground structure built on debt, favors, intimidation, and information. Everything had value. Instant noodles, coffee packets, phone access, extra clothing, prescription medication, protection, even silence. Marcus learned this the hard way after borrowing a single soup packet from another inmate during lockdown week. The debt seemed insignificant. Until the inmate returned 3 days later demanding 5 soups in repayment. Marcus refused. That night, someone flooded his cell toilet while he slept. Dirty water spread across the concrete floor, soaking his mattress and clothes. Officers ignored complaints. Rivera explained the lesson immediately. "Nobody cares about fairness in here," he told Marcus. "Only consequences." By month 2, Marcus stopped thinking like an outsider. That transformation scared him more than prison itself. He learned how to walk without appearing nervous, how to scan rooms automatically, how to identify tension before fights erupted. He stopped making direct eye contact for too long, stopped asking questions, stopped reacting emotionally. Prison had begun rewiring him. And then came the lockdown. It started after an inmate was attacked in the recreation yard with a homemade weapon reportedly constructed from sharpened metal removed from maintenance equipment. Sirens echoed through the facility while correctional officers rushed housing units into emergency procedures. For 13 days, inmates remained inside cramped cells almost non-stop. 23 hours a day. Meals pushed through narrow slots. Limited showers. No outside communication. No movement. Marcus says lockdowns change people fast. The prison already felt claustrophobic under normal conditions. During lockdown, the pressure became psychological. Men screamed through vents at night. Arguments exploded over tiny issues. Some inmates exercised obsessively in tiny spaces just to maintain sanity. Others stared silently at walls for hours. One prisoner in a nearby cell reportedly attempted self-harm after extended isolation. Officers removed him during the night while inmates banged against doors demanding medical attention. Marcus realized something during those 13 days. Physical survival was only half the battle. Mental survival mattered just as much. That's when Rivera finally explained the truth about the prison. "You think this place is about punishment," he said quietly one night. "It's really about pressure. Constant pressure. Eventually everybody bends. But some inmates didn't bend. They adapted. And the most dangerous among them learned how to thrive inside the chaos." When lockdown finally ended, Marcus noticed something strange. Dre's influence had grown stronger. Inmates approached him carefully during recreation periods. Conflicts disappeared after conversations with him. Contraband somehow continued moving through housing units despite heightened security measures. Even more unsettling, certain guards appeared unusually comfortable around him. Marcus couldn't tell whether officers feared Dre, respected him, or simply accepted the balance of power already established inside the prison. But rumors spread constantly. Some inmates claimed Dre controlled gambling operations across multiple housing units. Others claimed he coordinated prison politics between rival groups to prevent large-scale violence that could trigger permanent lockdowns. Nobody knew what was true. But everyone understood one thing. Dre had reach. And eventually, that reach extended toward Marcus. It happened in the Chow hall. Marcus sat alone finishing dinner when another inmate suddenly placed a tray beside him without asking. The man introduced himself as Leon, one of Dre's associates. "You got work assigned tomorrow?" Leon asked. Marcus nodded carefully. "Kitchen duty." Leon smiled slightly. "Not anymore." The next morning, Marcus discovered his assignment had changed mysteriously overnight. Instead of kitchen labor, he'd been reassigned to laundry operations, one of the most strategically valuable jobs inside the prison because it allowed controlled movement between housing areas. Marcus immediately understood what was happening. Someone was positioning him. The question was why. Over the following weeks, Leon continued approaching him casually. Never directly threatening. Never openly recruiting. Just conversations. Questions. Advice. Little tests. Would Marcus carry messages? Would he ignore certain activities? Would he stay silent? Each decision mattered. Because prison systems operate on observation. Inmates constantly study each other for weaknesses, usefulness, and reliability. Marcus tried staying neutral. That became impossible after the fight. It happened during evening recreation on a rainy Thursday in November. An older inmate accused Marcus of disrespect during a basketball game. The situation escalated instantly. Within seconds, a crowd formed around them. Prison fights rarely stay personal. They become public evaluations. If Marcus backed down, he'd appear weak. If he fought aggressively, he risked retaliation. There was no safe outcome. The other inmate swung first. Marcus reacted instinctively. The fight lasted maybe 20 seconds before officers deployed pepper spray across the yard and forced everyone to the ground. Both inmates were dragged into segregation pending disciplinary review. That's where Marcus experienced the part of prison few people truly understand. Solitary confinement. The cell measured roughly 7 feet wide. Concrete bed. Concrete desk. Steel toilet. Tiny reinforced window. No conversation. No movement. No distractions. Just silence. Hour after hour. Day after day. Marcus says time stopped feeling normal inside segregation. Sleep patterns collapsed. Thoughts repeated endlessly. Small sounds became unbearable. Some inmates shouted constantly just to hear another human response echo through the corridors. And during the 5th night in isolation, Marcus heard something that changed everything. A voice from another cell. Quiet. Controlled. Familiar. Dre. You handled yourself better than most, the voice said through the darkness. Marcus stayed silent. Then Dre asked the question Marcus had feared since arriving at the prison. You want protection, or you want problems? Marcus later admitted that was the moment his entire sentence shifted direction. Because prison survival always comes with a price. And once you accept protection inside a place like this, you usually owe something in return. But what Marcus didn't yet understand was how deep that debt could go. Or how dangerous Dre's real operation inside the prison actually was. Because beyond the violence, beyond the gangs, beyond the fear, there was another system operating inside those walls. One even some correctional officers allegedly avoided interfering with. And Marcus was about to become part of it. The price of survival. By the 6th month of his sentence, Marcus understood something most people never will. Prison doesn't force you to become violent overnight. It changes you gradually. One compromise at a time. One survival decision at a time. And once you cross certain lines inside America's toughest prisons, it becomes almost impossible to return to who you were before. Marcus spent 9 days in segregation before officers released him back into general population. The moment he stepped onto C block again, inmates watched him differently. Because prison had already interpreted the fight. He was no longer invisible. That came with consequences. Rivera gave Marcus a quiet warning the first night back. You got attention now, he said. That's good for survival. Bad for peace. Then came the offer. 2 days later, Leon approached Marcus near the laundry station during work assignment rotation. He handed Marcus a folded piece of paper containing nothing but numbers and initials. No explanation. Just instructions. Take this to D block tonight. Marcus immediately knew refusing carried risks. But accepting meant involvement in something bigger than prison politics. He asked Leon one question. What is this? Leon smiled. Insurance. That answer stayed in Marcus's head all day. Because by then he'd started recognizing the hidden systems operating inside the prison. Contraband moved through coded exchanges. Gambling debts were tracked with written ledgers. Information traveled faster than guards. Entire networks functioned beneath official supervision. And somewhere inside those networks stood inmates like Dre. Men who understood prison better than the institution itself. That evening Marcus made the delivery. Nobody stopped him. Nobody searched him. That disturbed him more than if officers had intervened. Because it suggested something former inmates and investigative journalists have alleged for years in certain correctional facilities. Some underground prison operations survive not because they're invisible, but because disrupting them creates even more instability. Marcus delivered the message to an inmate in D block nicknamed Saint. The man barely looked at the paper before burning it with a lighter hidden inside a hollowed-out deodorant container. Then Saint looked directly at Marcus. You working with Dre now? Marcus answered carefully. I'm just passing messages. Saint laughed quietly. That's how everybody starts. Over the following months, Marcus became increasingly connected to Dre's network without ever officially joining it. Small favors became regular responsibilities. Deliveries. Information. Mediation between inmates during conflicts. And in exchange? Protection. No one stole from Marcus anymore. Nobody tested him during Chow Hall disputes. Even officers treated him differently, though Marcus could never tell whether they suspected something or simply recognized shifting prison dynamics. For the first time since arriving he felt relatively safe. That's what made the trap effective. Because prison systems often reward compromise before they punish it. Marcus later admitted the psychological shift happened slowly enough that he barely noticed it himself. Activities that once felt dangerous became normal routines. Violence stopped shocking him. Manipulation became strategy. Distrust became instinct. The prison wasn't just containing him anymore. It was reshaping him. Then everything changed after an inmate named Holloway died. Official reports later described the death as a suspected overdose linked to contraband narcotics circulating through the facility. But inside the prison, rumors spread immediately. Some inmates believed Holloway owed gambling debts. Others claimed he'd been cooperating with investigators. A few whispered something even worse: that his death wasn't accidental. The prison erupted into tension almost overnight. Housing units entered repeated lockdowns while tactical teams searched cells for contraband and weapons. Officers moved aggressively. Inmates grew paranoid. Conversations stopped whenever guards approached. And suddenly Marcus found himself trapped between two worlds. Because investigators had started paying attention to Dre's network. One afternoon, Marcus was escorted unexpectedly into an interview room near administrative offices. Waiting inside were two prison intelligence officers and a man Marcus had never seen before. The stranger introduced himself as a federal investigator. Then he placed photographs on the table. Pictures of inmates, messages, laundry exchanges, movement logs, including Marcus. "We know you're connected," the investigator said calmly. Marcus says his heart started pounding immediately. Because in prison, being labeled an informant can become a death sentence. The investigator leaned forward. "You help us understand what's happening inside this facility, and we can help you." That was the moment Marcus faced the most dangerous decision of his entire sentence. Not violence. Not gangs. Trust. Because both sides suddenly wanted something from him. And inside prison, divided loyalty can get people buried. Marcus refused to cooperate initially. Fear controlled him. He'd seen what happened to inmates accused of informing. Some disappeared into protective custody permanently. Others faced assaults so brutal entire housing units whispered about them afterward. But pressure mounted fast. Investigators continued calling him into meetings. Meanwhile, inmates started noticing. The prison atmosphere changed around him almost immediately. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Certain inmates avoided eye contact. One morning Marcus returned to his cell and found a message scratched into the metal frame beside his bunk. "We see everything." No signature. No explanation. Just a warning. Rivera looked terrified when he saw it. "You need to fix this fast," he told Marcus quietly. But there was no fixing it anymore. The walls were closing from both directions. Marcus later described the following weeks as the most psychologically exhausting period of his life. Every movement felt monitored. Every conversation felt dangerous. Sleep became nearly impossible. Then came the riot. It started in the recreation yard after a confrontation between rival inmate groups escalated during restricted movement hours. According to official incident summaries from similar prison disturbances across the United States, riots often erupt not from single events, but accumulated tension. This one exploded in seconds. Fights spread across the yard while alarms blared through the compound. Inmates armed with improvised weapons attacked each other as officers deployed chemical agents and emergency response teams flooded the area. Marcus got trapped near a fence line during the chaos. He remembers smoke, screaming, blood on concrete, and one image that still haunted him years later. An inmate lying motionless while dozens of others continued fighting around him like he wasn't even there. Marcus survived by staying low and reaching an emergency extraction corridor alongside several other inmates. But the riot changed the prison permanently. The facility entered extended lockdown. Federal investigators intensified operations. Transfers began. And suddenly Dre disappeared. No announcement. No explanation. One day he was there. The next day his cell stood empty. Rumors spread instantly. Some claimed he'd been transferred to a supermax facility. Others believed he'd negotiated cooperation agreements. A few inmates insisted officers removed him secretly during the night because administrators feared what would happen if he stayed. Marcus never learned the truth. But after Dre vanished, the prison atmosphere shifted dramatically. Violence temporarily decreased. Contraband networks fractured. Housing units became unstable without centralized influence holding certain conflicts together. That realization disturbed Marcus deeply. Because it forced him to confront something uncomfortable. Sometimes the prison's unofficial power structures had maintained more order than the official ones. 8 months later, Marcus walked out of the prison gates after earning sentence reductions tied to program participation and overcrowding adjustments. But freedom didn't feel normal. Not immediately. For weeks, he woke up automatically at count times during the night. He avoided sitting with his back exposed in restaurants. Loud metal noises triggered anxiety. Crowded rooms felt dangerous. Prison had followed him home. Today, Marcus rarely speaks publicly about his experience. But he agreed to this account because he believes most Americans fundamentally misunderstand what long-term incarceration actually does to people psychologically. It teaches survival, he said during one interview. But survival and rehabilitation aren't always the same thing. And maybe that's the real story behind America's toughest prisons. Not just the violence, not just the gangs, not even the fear, but the invisible transformation that happens to people inside systems built around pressure, isolation, and power. Because some inmates leave prison physically alive, while parts of them never truly leave at all. If you found this documentary compelling, subscribe for more first-hand investigations into the hidden realities of prisons, criminal networks, and justice systems most people never see from the inside.